They say in the backwoods of Kentucky you can still hear it, an unfinished hymn carried by the wind, sung by voices that never aged past 21. The Murphy family were once known as hardworking farmers, Irish immigrants who settled on rough land after the Civil War. But their story, what the church never recorded, what the county archives buried, was not one of prosperity. It was one of a curse that could not be spoken aloud. Every son born to the Murphy line, without exception, died on the eve of his 21st birthday. Not a day later, not a day sooner, the town whispered about bad luck, about weak blood, about God's justice. But as years passed, the pattern became undeniable. These were not accidents, not disease, not chance. It was something older, something the Murphys themselves had bound their lineage to long before they crossed the ocean. And by the time anyone dared to investigate, the trail led not to the cemetery where the Murphy boys were buried, but to a locked cellar beneath their abandoned farmhouse, where the earth was blackened as though fire had burned there for centuries. The Murphys arrived in America in 1869, escaping famine and debts in Ireland. Patrick Murphy, the patriarch, bought 40 acres of rough pastureland near Bardstown, Kentucky. It was poor soil for farming, but it came cheap, and the deed was signed with curious haste by the county clerk, as though he wanted rid of it. Neighbors remembered Patrick as stern, superstitious, and haunted. His wife Bridget was quieter, always carrying a rosary, her lips moving constantly in silent prayer. They built their homestead in 1870. That same year, their first son, Thomas, was born. Thomas was a bright, curious boy, known for reading by lantern light and sketching strange symbols into the dirt outside the schoolhouse. By the age of 16, he spoke of nightmares where faceless men sang hymns in broken Gaelic. His teacher dismissed it as imagination, but on the night of his 21st birthday, Thomas was found hanging from the rafters of the barn. His body, townsfolk whispered, had not stiffened in the usual way. His jaw hung loose, his skin drained, his eyes wide with terror, as if something had pulled him from within. The coroner wrote suicide. His mother wrote nothing. His father ordered the barn doors chained shut. And then Bridget bore another son. James Murphy, the second son, was born in 1873. Stronger than Thomas, quieter, but always afraid of the barn. He avoided it, even when his father ordered him to work inside. He claimed he heard breathing behind the chained doors at night. By 1894, James was nearly 21. On the eve of his birthday, the church bells rang for evening mass. James never arrived. At dawn, his body was discovered near the Cree, eyes open, mouth full of mud, lungs collapsed as though he had drowned on dry land. The town was unsettled. 2 sons, both dead at 21. The priest insisted it was the devil's work, but the Murphys did not protest. They simply buried James beside his brother, the mother weeping silently, the father digging furiously, as if speed might hide the shame. By the third son, Daniel, born in 1876, neighbors whispered what the Murphys refused to, that each child was being claimed. Claimed by what, no one knew. The family stopped attending church. The priest called it blasphemy, but the truth was darker. The Murphys had stopped going not out of defiance, but out of fear. The last time Bridget stepped inside, she fainted before the altar. Witnesses swore she saw something, standing where no man stood. When Daniel's 21st year approached, the sheriff swore he would keep watch. He sat outside the Murphy house with his rifle, the town's eyes upon him. By dawn, Daniel was gone, not a trace, not a scream, not a single footprint in the mud outside. And when the sheriff entered the chained barn, he swore he saw the rafters swaying, as though something unseen had just departed. After Daniel vanished, the barn became the center of town gossip. Neighbors swore they heard voices inside, low chanting in a language older than English, older than Gaelic. Lantern light flickered beneath the gaps in the wood, though no flame was lit within. Patrick Murphy kept it chained, but each morning the chains were found loosened as though gnawed through from the inside. His wife begged him to burn the structure down, but Patrick refused. He claimed it was all that kept the family bound to the land, that if the barn went, so too would they. By winter of 1897, Bridget bore another son, Michael, the fourth, and with him came the final unraveling of the family's silence. Michael grew up different, Where Thomas had been curious, James fearful, and Daniel obedient, Michael was defiant. By 15, he rejected his father's orders, even mocking the old man's mutterings about the bargain. The boy refused to fear the barn. In fact, he often sat outside it at night, whistling as though daring something to answer. He carved symbols into trees, the same shapes Thomas once drew, but sharper, more deliberate, as though he knew what they meant. Patrick beat him for it. Bridget prayed harder, but Michael only laughed, declaring that he would be the first Murphy son to live past 21. In 1918, on the eve of his birthday, the war ended overseas. The church bells rang in celebration. For the first time in decades, hope flickered. Perhaps the curse would be broken. But that night, witnesses claimed they saw fire burst from the roof of the Murphy barn. The sheriff, now an old man, arrived too late. Inside, Michael's body lay on the earth, charred but not consumed, as though the flames had only kissed him. His chest bore markings, symbols, a spiral cut deep into his flesh, burned not by accident, but by ritual. The county buried him in haste. The priest warned the family not to dig deeper into things better left in God's hands. But the townsfolk had already begun calling the Murphys what they truly were, marked. By the 1920s, the Murphy homestead had grown silent. Patrick was frail, Bridget near, mad, muttering constantly in Gaelic. Yet somehow another child was born, Sean, their fifth son. The boy was small, weak, and sickly, his cries thin as paper tearing. By then the town had grown cruel. Children were forbidden from playing near the Murphy land. At school, Sean was shunned, mocked, even struck. His teachers wrote that he was unnaturally quiet, with eyes that lingered too long on shadows. When Sean turned 12, he was sent to Wape, placed in a Catholic orphanage in Louisville after both parents died within weeks of each other. Officially, Patrick had heart failure and Bridget fever, but records show both bodies were buried without autopsy. The priest in charge of their burial insisted it was for the sake of the town. At the orphanage, Sean rarely spoke. But when he did, other children wept in terror. They claimed his voice was not his own, as though something else was speaking through him. And yet the pattern continued. In 1931, the night before Sean's 21st birthday, the orphanage reported a fire in the East Wing. 23 children perished. Only one body was never recovered. Sean Murphy's, the records stopped there, his name erased from rolls, his file burned, his existence denied. But some say the walls of that orphanage, rebuilt, repainted, consecrated, still bleed black whenever rain strikes them. After the orphanage fire, whispers of Sean Murphy spread across the county. Local papers published brief obituaries for the dead children, but none mentioned Sean by name. It was as if the boy had never existed. One clerk at the Louisville courthouse, however, claimed otherwise. He insisted there was once a file on Sean Murphy, but when he reached for it, the drawer was empty. Entire pages of the census from 1920 had been cut away, surgical precision, as if someone had gone through the archives and erased the bloodline. The clerk spoke too much. Within weeks, he was dismissed from his post, accused of drunken misconduct. And yet, he swore to neighbors before leaving town that he had seen something scratched into the wood of the orphanage's basement. A phrase in Latin, vinculum aeternum, the eternal bond. If the records are to be believed, there should have been no more Murphy sons after Sean. But the 1935 census from Bardstown lists a household with a Murphy, Caleb, age 6. No birth certificate, no parents listed, just the name. Neighbors said the boy appeared out of nowhere. He lived with an uncle, though no one could recall the man's first name, only that he was another Murphy. The child had the same pale features, the same fixed gaze, and he too avoided the barn, which still stood despite decades of rot, the chains clinging to its doors like iron vines. By the time Caleb reached adolescence, the country was in the grip of the Great Depression. People starved, families moved, towns shrank, and yet in Bardstown they still whispered about one thing, that Caleb Murphy was counting down to 21. Local boys dared each other to sneak to the Murphy farm at night. They swore they saw Caleb in the fields, barefoot, standing perfectly still beneath the moon, arms outstretched as though welcoming something only he could see. When asked about it in school, he said nothing. He simply drew spirals, circles within circles, always 21 lines. In 1950, the curse struck again. Caleb Murphy turned 21. By then, most of Bardstown wanted nothing to do with the family. Some even left town in the days leading up to his birthday, fearing the air itself would sour. That night, heavy storms rolled in. Thunder rattled the windows, lightning split the sky, and in the barn, the same barn, still impossibly upright, neighbors claimed to see firelight glowing from within. At dawn, the sheriff entered. He found Caleb's body seated in a chair at the center of the barn. Not burned, not mutilated, simply gone inside. His chest was split open, ribs peeled back like an altar, but his organs were missing. Not stolen, not butchered, gone. On the walls around him, 21 names scrawled in blood, all the Murphy sons who came before, and one space left blank, awaiting the next. The sheriff filed no report. The priest said no funeral. The county clerk struck Caleb's name from record, and just like that, the Murphy line was silenced, or so they claimed. After Caleb's death, the parish priest of Bardstown, Father O'Malley, delivered a sermon unlike any other. Witnesses swore his voice trembled, his eyes darting toward the Murphy farm, though he never named it directly. There are families, he said, that do not belong to us, families that carry debts older than our church, older than this country, and when those debts are collected, no man, no priest, no sheriff can stand in their way. Within a week, Father O'Malley was transferred. Officially, he was sent to a parish in Chicago. Unofficially, he disappeared en route. His carriage overturned, his body never recovered. The church issued no further comment. It was then the town realized this story was not simply theirs to fear. Others were watching. Others had reason to keep the Murphy name buried. Bardstown County began erasing the family from its records with frightening efficiency. Tax rolls listed the Murphy farm as abandoned. Census takers skipped the property entirely. School ledgers where Murphy children once appeared were rewritten, names scraped away as if in shame. When townsfolk raised questions, officials dismissed them. Clerical errors, lost pages. But the effect was deliberate. Within a generation, newcomers to Bardstown had never even heard of the family. Only one piece of evidence survived: a weathered journal hidden in the courthouse basement. It belonged to the county coroner from the 1890s. In shaky handwriting, he had written, "These boys do not die as men die. They are emptied, hollowed, as though something feeds upon them, and always the number 21, always." The journal ended abruptly. The last page was torn, leaving only a phrase etched into the margin: "The bond holds." In 1951, a young seminarian named Richard Hall arrived in Bardstown, sent by the Archdiocese to observe conditions in the county. At first, he questioned the odd silence surrounding the Murphy land, then he began asking too much. Hall visited the orphanage in Louisville, pressing the sisters for information on Sean Murphy. He was turned away twice before finally sneaking into the East Wing one stormy night. What he found sickened him. In the charred plaster of the basement walls, beneath decades of paint, lay rows of carved spirals, the same sigils the Murphy boys had drawn since childhood. Circles upon circles, always 21 lines. Hall fled Bardstown the next morning. In his final letter to a fellow seminarian, he wrote only this: "The Murphys are not cursed. They are claimed by a vow older than Rome, older than Christ himself. The church cannot save them. Perhaps it never tried." The letter was confiscated. Hall's name was struck from seminary records, but fragments of his warning remain. By the mid-1950s, Bardstown's sheriff, William Harker, had grown old. He had seen too much. He had witnessed Daniel vanish, Michael burn, Caleb hollowed out. And in his final years, he left behind a confession written in pencil on cheap stationery, hidden in the lining of his Bible. "I carried a rifle," he wrote, "but it was useless, not against what I saw in that barn. The rafters moved though no wind touched them. The earth there was black and breathing. I do not know if the Murphys bargained with it, or if they were born its sacrifice, but I know this: when it takes a son, it takes something. From the rest of us too, our memories blur, our records vanish. Our mouths go dry when we try to speak their name. It is not only claiming them, it is claiming us." The letter ended with a warning: "If you read this, do not let them count you." In 1960, federal census takers once again skipped the Murphy land. It was no longer listed on maps, though the barn still stood rotting, its roof sagging like a dying beast. But deeper in the archives, one anomaly appeared. A census worker had scrawled a note in the margin beside Bardstown's entry. Family omitted, sons erased, 21 blanks. That note was struck through with red ink. The page itself was later torn from the archive book. But the impression of the pencil, pressed deep into the next sheet, remained. It was as though the numbers themselves had been hollowed out, leaving the shape of a family that no longer officially existed. And yet, every few years, rumors persisted of a boy wandering the Murphy land, pale, silent, waiting, always waiting. By 1967, the archdiocese made another move. A team of 3 priests, trained in exorcism, were sent quietly to Bardstown. They carried holy water, relics, and the authority of the church. For 2 days, nothing was reported. On the 3rd, the sheriff found their automobile abandoned by the roadside. Inside were their robes soaked with mud, their Bibles, pages torn out, and a single note pinned to the dashboard. "It is not the devil, do not mistake it, it is older." The priests were never seen again. That same week, townsfolk swore the Murphy barn burned down at last. But when they approached, they found the walls still standing, untouched, though the ground around it smoldered as if struck by lightning. And in the doorway, carved freshly into the wood, were 21 tally marks. By the 1970s, the Murphy farm had long been abandoned, or so the records claimed. Yet scattered stories from nearby counties told of pale young men who appeared suddenly, without parents, without history. Always around 15 years old, always with the name Murphy. One surfaced in Owensboro, another in Bowling Green. Teachers recalled they were quiet, obedient, but troubled by violent night terrors. Each one drew spirals in their notebooks, precise and unbroken. None of them reached 22. In each town, fires broke out, bridges collapsed, reservoirs turned black overnight, and each time the boy was found dead, or worse, vanished without remains. The pattern was undeniable. The family had become rootless. The curse was no longer tied to Bardstown alone. It was drifting, attaching itself wherever a Murphy son appeared, like an old debt collecting interest. In 1981, a young historian at the University of Louisville, Margaret Klein, attempted to compile a genealogy of immigrant families in Kentucky. When she reached the Murphys, she found only silence. The archives yielded nothing but gaps, redactions, missing census sheets. She began interviewing locals. Slowly, she pieced together fragments: the barn, the sons, the age of 21. She drafted a paper titled "The Erased Family of Bardstown, a Study in Suppressed Genealogies." Her advisor warned against publishing. "There are reasons," he said, "why some stories aren't meant for print." Margaret ignored him. On the day her thesis was due, she vanished from her apartment. Her typewriter remained. The final page of her draft still rolled into the machine. It read only, "The Murphys did not die out, they were scattered." Her thesis was never catalogued. Her name was struck from university records. By the late 1980s, Kentucky state officials grew nervous about the recurring fires, drownings, and disappearances linked to the Murphy name. Quietly, they declared the Bardstown property restricted land. No trespassing, no photographs, no public record. The barn was sealed with steel plates, its windows boarded, its doors chained again. A fence was erected around the property. Guards were posted, though never in daylight, only at night. The official statement claimed the land was contaminated. No further explanation was given, but locals said they still saw young men wandering toward the fence. Each time the guards let them through, no resistance, no questions, and when dawn came, the guards were gone, the boys were gone, only the barn remained. In 1991, a storm unlike any in living memory struck Bardstown. Lightning split the sky in endless succession, rain beating like fists against the earth. Locals swore the thunder did not roll, it sang, low and mournful, like a choir in a language no one alive could name. When it ended, the barn's roof finally caved in. Smoke rose for days. Officials kept the public away, citing structural collapse. But one photograph leaked, a blurred black and white image taken by a curious teenager. In it, the interior of the barn glowed faintly, though no fire was visible. Across the last standing beam, a fresh inscription had been carved, 21 names, all the Murphy sons listed in sequence, each with their year of death. At the bottom, a final name had been added, the last. No date, no body, only a warning that the line had ended, or worse, that it had fulfilled its bargain. Today, the Murphy farm is nothing more than fenced earth and weeds. The barn collapsed long ago, but locals say the ground where it stood never grows grass. It stays black, damp, as if forever scorched. Official records contain nothing. No Murphy family in Bardstown, no orphanage fire in Louisville, no vanished seminarian, no erased census lines. The state archives are silent, the church is silent, universities dismiss it all as folklore, and yet, travelers passing through the backroads of Nelson County tell of something else. They speak of pale young men hitchhiking by the roadside, eyes fixed on nothing, hands clenched as if counting invisible beads, always alone, always quiet, always 21 years old. Those who pick them up swear the ride is brief. The boy never speaks, and when they glance at the passenger's seat again, it is empty. Only the faint smell of smoke remains. The Murphy family may have been erased from history, but the bond they carried, the eternal debt, was never broken. And somewhere, in the silence beyond memory, the hymn continues.